Hey guys, Windsor here, and welcome to the Groove Guru podcast. Today, I want to explore a theme that's been prominent in my life recently, and is something I've been reflecting on a lot, especially in the event of my father's passing, which happened just under a year ago at the time of recording this. And that is trusting in the timing of life and navigating some of life's more challenging and emotionally charged times with more wisdom and grace than we may have thought possible. Before I dive deeper, I'm glad to announce that the new Hugh Cornwell live album, All the Fun of the Fair, which I drummed and sang on earlier in the year, is out now. And it's a mixture of Strangler's classics and choice cuts from Hugh's solo career, and a nice document of some highlights of our work together in recent years. And I invite you to check that out on your favourite streaming platform, or buy a physical or digital copy featuring bonus tracks if that's something you fancy. Now, that album was recorded during a tour just a few weeks after my father's passing, and I'm seeing it as a reminder and testament of how wisdom and grace carried me through those emotionally charged times, and that's where I want to begin today. And during that tour for the All the Fun of the Fair album, we put a lot of work into preparing for that, and during the actual tour there was a lot of emotion coming up for me. And as much as I'd practiced to make my drumming and singing effortless, I hadn't anticipated how the loss of my father would affect me. Reflecting on the experience now, I realised that something deeper carried me through. And it's shown me that no matter how turbulent that life can get, we can cultivate trust not only in life's timing, but that within each of us, there's a deep wisdom we can always rely on, even and especially in life's toughest moments. So we'd been preparing for that tour for many months, and I'd practiced for it probably more than any other tour that I've done so far as a professional musician. And before the tour, I was super confident in my ability to show up and perform at my best night after night. Now, the waves of grief that then appeared for me at the time added to the challenge and put some more weight on the bar, much more weight on the bar emotionally. And at times, some moments of self-doubt creeped in, and I wondered if I could pull the tour off as skillfully and as masterfully as I normally would, with all those heavy emotions and thoughts about my dad and all the implications about that. But I'm grateful that I remembered the source of wisdom and resilience that we all have within us. And the more that I tapped into that and leaned into that, the more I found myself performing and connecting even deeper with the music and letting it flow in ways beyond what I expected. And reflecting on that now, the more that I see that wisdom carried me through that tour. Before I go any further, I feel blessed to have this understanding and all the health, well-being, resilience and wisdom that it provides. And not many people see it, but it's available and reliably accessible when we know where to look. And it's a direction that we'll be exploring here today, and want to invite you to look in as you listen. And for another exploration on how this inner resilience we have can show up for you, I invite you to check out another recent podcast, Uncovering Emotional Resilience, from the Groove Guru podcast, which looks at this kind of thing from a slightly different angle. What I found particularly helpful in the process of doing that tour was there were a few key insights that came to me in line with my understanding of how the mind works that were hugely helpful in navigating that period with more grace and freedom than I thought possible. And the first was knowing where my experience was coming from, which was essentially my state of mind in the moment. And even though the events were happening as they were at the time, that is, my father had passed and I had a tour that I was committed to doing and showing up for with excellence, my experience of all of that was completely self-generated and not a result of what was happening in the world. And one way that I saw that was because even though the circumstances were the same, my experience was fluctuating and changing based on my thinking in the moment. And at times I would feel waves of grief. One moment I'd be thinking about my dad and feeling sad. Then in another moment I'd be feeling grateful and thankful for all the wonderful memories that we shared. And in another moment I'd be in a real calm space of acceptance about it. Then other moments I'd be tending to my work on the tour, focusing on the music and being as fully present with it as I could. And at those times I wasn't even thinking about my dad. So again, our experience of life in the moment is not about circumstances in the world, but how we are experiencing our mind via the gift of thought, which is constantly changing. Now, even when we start to see where our experience is coming from internally, there are times in life that, in short, it can really suck, all right? And grief being one of the most uncomfortable experiences that's ever shown up for me. And in those really charged emotional times that can appear, there's a temptation to try and change our experience and make it go away, such as, mental reframing of it and indulging in distractions, as many people do, such as, drugs and alcohol. And whilst doing that can provide a temporary fix, those attempts to try and make our experience better often just get in the way. And when we wake up to the changing nature of our experience, we can see that it's always changing. And as you navigate your own experiences, I invite you to notice how emotions come and go. Like today, for example, your inner world it's constantly changed, and so have your feelings, however subtle or dramatic. Like, for example, if you've been feeling a bit down, it's never been exactly the same feeling. It's moved a bit. There's been movement in it. And if you've been generally happy too, it moves around. And the more we start to see this ever-changing landscape of our experience, the more we can see how we don't need to do anything to change how we feel. And we can simply let it change naturally. And in a way, we have no other choice. The wisdom within you knows how to perfectly change your experience moment to moment, and always will. And it always has your back in that regard, and will always bring what is most helpful to you in the moment. And the more we start to look in that direction of what is true, the more we access the resilience and power that we all have to show up at our best no matter what. And as an analogy for this, and please forgive the example, okay, the heavier emotions that come up for people are a bit like having a hangover. Okay, and if you've ever experienced a hangover, and I'm sure no one listening to this podcast ever has, if you have a hangover, you can follow your common sense and hydrate and get some fresh air and do whatever else occurs to you, but essentially you can't really do anything about it except let it pass in its own time. And as that happens, you can get worked up in your head and get into judgment about why you're feeling hungover, and that can all add to your mental load. Or you can simply let that too pass gracefully, and as you get clearer, you can reflect and do what makes sense to you moving forward. One of my favourite quotes, and a pointer that's been really life-changing for me, especially during that period, is by Scottish mystic Sydney Banks, which is, if the only thing people learned was not to be afraid of their experience, that alone would change the world. And there are times that we all have experiences that can be quite scary at times as we worry or indulge in the horror movies we can often create in our heads. But always, always underneath that, we have a deeper nature that is always okay and perfectly healthy. And the more we look in that direction, we always see that we have solid ground psychologically to return to. A North Star, if you will. And as we recognise such a depth of well-being that we always have access to, one thought away, a feeling of presence away, a feeling of love away, we can realise that as we move beyond our fears, we don't need to be afraid of our experience, and we can bask more in that beautiful, pure feeling of wisdom that will guide us no matter what shows up in our life. Now, whatever our experience is as we show up in the world, essentially what I'm suggesting here at the moment is that there's a time where it's not helpful to think into our experience, to think into our thinking, such as when we're feeling really emotional, stressed, tense, or upset, which is usually when it feels most compelling to go there, to go in here. And thinking into those states of mind usually doesn't serve us in any other way but to create a bit of a mess. Okay. Now, at the time of the tour, it was often a mess up here, when I went into my thinking about my dad. So I'm grateful that I knew better to leave it the heck alone when I could see to do that, even though it was compelling not to. And I also want to be clear here that there are times when thinking into your experience can be helpful, such as planning, using the mind as a tool in that way, which obviously has its place. Like for the tour, there was a lot of planning logistically to do to allow it to happen, booking venues and hotels and making all the travel plans, which wasn't my responsibility as that was the management's and tour managers' area, though there was a lot of planning and prep required on my behalf musically, like learning the repertoire, the Hugh and the Stranglers tunes, like taking the music apart, making charts, transcribing, then putting it all back together and practicing it and playing to the highest level I could, whether on my own or with the band. But when it comes to planning, there's a great phrase: life is what happens when you're busy making plans, or otherwise put, man plans, God laughs. And whether that was in the music or changes that needed to be made to it in rehearsals or at the shows, or the added emotions that were coming up that I didn't anticipate with my father's passing, what I found was that tapping into wisdom was again what carried me through all of that and helped me be more receptive to what was happening and in the best possible space, whatever showed up, where the experience was one of much more flow and intuition. Now, if you're wondering what I'm meaning by wisdom, okay, let's bring it back to that all of our perceptual experience of life, it's via our state of mind in the moment, okay, which is always happening. And we experience the gift of our mind, which at its core is perfectly clear, via thought, which is always changing, and it's a variable that times can make the mind more or less clear. And sometimes it can muddy the clear water of our mind's natural state. And what I'm referring to as wisdom, I'm pointing to a less contaminated, clearer, purer, deep experience of the mind and the well-being and pure mental health that we all have, which naturally reveals itself when we wake up to all the thinking that we do that covers it up. And a metaphor I like to use for that is listening. So when we're playing music, if you're a musician, or being with another person and listening to them, or wanting to be at your clearest and with a ready flow of creativity in any situation, we have to let go of the noise that occurs in our thought to wake up to that deeper space where it's where musicians and athletes call being in the zone, or any creative, and we're all creative, can call, being in flow. And when we let go of our overthinking, the unnecessary thinking, the thinking that's unhelpful, we access that natural state of presence and flow. And when we touch that space, even if for a split second, we awaken to that pure potential of our experience. And it's there that we're always at our most responsive and intuitive and resourceful and resilient. And the more I tapped into that space on the tour, not just on stage, but off stage, the more my head cleared and I could see the next thing to do. And without overthinking, I just did it. And that applied to the shows themselves and everything else. And the shows, the more I listened, the less I thought about my dad, and the more my intuition showed up and I connected with the heart of the groove and the music. The creativity, it flowed as it had to, without any unnecessary effort, to bring all of those notes to the tape that made it onto the final album. Now, I'm not suggesting that I completely lived in that space all the time. No one does. And there was a lot of thought and emotion coming up, as I've alluded to. But the more I noticed what was coming up, and that I could see and hear beyond that, the more graceful the whole experience was, and the more that I've come to see that wisdom carried me through it all. The more I've been living in this state of wisdom and grace, I've seen that it's actually possible to live in this deeper, guided feeling more and more of the time, which again is a matter of waking up from the thinking and the mental movies that cover it up. And the more we show up from here, we can start to recognize the perfection of life's timing, life's perfect timing that's already in motion here and now. And this is true with the apparent big stuff and this apparent small stuff in our life. And since our life is made up of the moments that we experience, living from a deeper feeling, whatever shows up, it makes the joy of life's perfect timing more apparent. A fun example of this recently was when I was in Scotland, visiting my hometown where I grew up. And that was after delivering the celebration speech for my father a few days ago. And after a day of travel and a lot of sitting, I went out for a walk to get some movement and steps in and explore a bit. And when I was out, I decided to order a meal from a restaurant for delivery. So it was a restaurant that my father and I and my mother, when she was still around too, would often enjoy together. So that felt a beautiful thing to do. And when I was out walking and had ordered the meal, I decided to stock up on some supplies from local stores, and I was deliberating what to buy. And then in the midst of that, I popped out of my thinking, and my intuition, it pointed me, okay, make a decision, go back to the hotel now. So I did that, and when I got back to the hotel, as I was approaching the hotel, the delivery driver showed up at the exact same moment as I arrived back there. Another another fun example happened when I was ordering some new headphones recently. And rather than sell my old pair, I decided to trade them in and upgrade them. And initially I couldn't do that because I'd misplaced one of the cables it came with. So I ordered a new cable to be delivered. And then I realised that I didn't want to wait that long for it to be delivered, as I wanted the new headphone that I had my eye on sooner. So I sourced another cable locally and went about trading in the headphones before going to get the new one. And I then tried to cancel the new order of the extra cable that I bought, but I couldn't because it had already been dispatched and shipped. So fair enough, I thought, and I let that go. And then when I went to buy the new headphones, in the box, the same cable accessory that I thought I had one too many of now, it was missing from the box contents. So that worked out perfectly too. And, things like this are fun when they show up. And even though those were just some small examples of what can happen when we trust in that timing of life, the same perfect timing shows up with the bigger stuff too. And again, such as the tour that I mentioned, where the deeper I listened and showed up from the zone, the performances took care of themselves and we connected with the audience and played from the best possible space. And in ways like these, we can also come to see that life's perfect timing reveals itself often when we least expect it, which can serve as a beautiful reminder to trust in something deeper. And what we can realise is that our wisdom is available in all moments. When we experience challenging times, we can always rely on our wisdom to guide us. And, a key point about that challenge is that, challenge, when we think of challenge is an experience. And all experiences have a feeling. And where do feelings come from? Again, thought. And when we wake up to the thinking that we do that creates any of the difficulties that we experience, which we are creating, there are still situations to be addressed in the world. Yet, rather from doing so from a less clear mind, which we can always tell from how we're feeling and how emotional we are, we can see beyond that to a higher and more clear and unobstructed perspective of our wisdom. And from there, we see what to do and do what needs to be done from a place of much greater ease also. As we round this one up and making this practical, it's all about where you're showing up from psychologically as you live your life and do what you do. And again, we can learn to use our conceptual mind as a tool and planning is useful. And we can also recognise that we don't need to be engaged with our thinking and conceptualising all the time either, because that can take a lot of energy. And also, though a lot of our thinking is helpful, a lot of it really isn't. And when we start to notice that most of the thinking or much of the thinking that we do isn't worth listening to, we can wake up from the noise of it and see beyond it to that space inside where, again, life's much easier and it's filled with a natural enjoyment of whatever shows up. And our wisdom is a state of mind that's also our well-being. And our wisdom, our well-being, is independent of any circumstance. And when we wake up to that, our wisdom and our well-being, we can find well-being even when it seems unjustified, such as situations we would normally associate as being really difficult, such as when bereavement happens or any other challenging experiences that appear. And in those tough times, even when you don't feel like it, you can see beyond all of the noise and the garbage that the mind can bring up and still take action and just do the thing you need to do. And also be in that space where we allow the timing of life to work its magic. And when we do, we create results on a whole new level. As I put it in a recent post, life's timing is perfect. Even when you doubt yourself, trust the process. And as you look within and take the best steps you can see to from clarity, you'll create the perfect outcomes for you. No matter what you're facing, whether it's navigating your professional life or personal loss or everyday challenges that show up, your wisdom is always there to guide you. And when we stop resisting and start trusting in our deeper nature and lean into that, we live in harmony with the unfolding of life's perfect timing and also the most beautiful feeling we can experience right here and right now. So, have fun. Listen to your wisdom. Trust in life's perfect timing. And I'll speak with you soon.